So, you want to get into Railjack? Great! Awesome! The world could always use more Railjack captains. Maybe you're just worried about the Railjack resource requirements for Helminth, or maybe you just want in on the good old-fashioned Railjack Affinity Farm. That's okay, these are both really good reasons to get into Railjack. So, let's have a look at the most efficient way to get yourself into Railjack. How to Railjack 101. So, in order to get your own Railjack, which I definitely recommend if you want to do an Affinity Farm, you're going to need to complete the Rising Tide quest, okay? Now, this particular quest is going to take some time. It takes about 6 hours to make each part, and that's basically part of the quest. So, there's no really any way of getting past that. You're going to have to do that, alright? So what do you do while you're waiting for your Railjack part to be completed? Do you just sit around and twiddle your thumbs, or do you actually go out and do something? I would recommend going out and actually doing something, and that thing that you should be doing is joining other people's Railjacks. So what do you want to do? You basically want to find a competent captain in recruiting chat, or you find a streamer who's playing Railjack. Good luck with that. Or if you're playing the Oceania server, you're more than welcome to join me on a Friday night. Just let me know that you want to play some Railjack, and I'll try to accommodate you in any way, shape, and form. Honestly, if you can't find any people to join, that's probably going to be bad luck. We'll get around to how your experience is going to be if you can't find anyone to join. In the meantime, though, if you do manage to join someone in their Railjack, the best idea is probably to stick to one of their side guns. What do I mean about that? Here we are in free space with my Railjack, the Catherine Gaza, with a couple of random people. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to come over to this side gun and you press X in order to activate the turret. So at level 1, so basically at super duper new mode, you're only going to have 180 degrees worth of movement. Once you reach a certain gunner level, you're going to have 360 degrees, so it turns into a 360 cannon. But at the start, you're only going to have a 180 degree cannon. That's the deal, okay? An alternative job that you may be given to do is to just run around and repair stuff. What do I mean about that? Well, basically what you want to do is you want to walk to areas that have gigantic leaks. For example, this particular wall, which sometimes has a breach. Basically, you want to grab out your Omni tool, which is usually the last tool that is on your gear wheel. Sometimes you can actually hotkey that particular Omni tool to a different part of your gear wheel, so you can do that if you want. And essentially, you're going to try and plug in the gaps with this because it's essentially like a fire extinguisher, except it's actually shooting out this thing called Railajck, which can plug gaps and solve various problems. It's a really powerful tool indeed. Alternatively, if you actually listen to your captain, they may actually want you to do something such as jumping out to an objective. What do I mean by that? So, in order to do that, you're going to want to actually go to a specific area of your ship. There are several of these little pads scattered across your ship. There's one over here, there's one on the other side of your ship right there, there's actually one down at the back somewhere, there's one in the middle of the ship as well. I tend to go for this one in particular because it's the closest to the pilot seat. But essentially you exit the Railjack like so, and now you're in your Railjack, and you can actually also play Railjack missions in your Arcwing. Just make sure to bring a particularly good arc gun. I think the Imperator Vandal is pretty good. Some people keep saying that I think it was the Cyanex is really good, or maybe the Mosselin seems to be really good as well. There are plenty of good Arcwing weapons to choose from, just pick the one that you like the most. Awesome. And in order to enter the ship, you just basically come back to the ship like so. Right now the ship is cloaked, we'll talk about that later, but essentially you just press X to enter the ship, and huzzah, we're back in the ship. Awesome. Fantastic. Personally, I find that the Arcwing side of Railjack is a little bit messed up, i.e. the Arcwing is sometimes a bit too slow, and perhaps the aiming section of Arcwing is a little bit here and there. But if you're finding that Arcwing is a really good experience for you, great, awesome. If not, I would probably stick to using the side guns of the Railjack. I think they are a lot more, I don't know, designed for this particular game mode. At this point, your main goal in joining someone else's Railjack is just to basically get a few resources in order to build some of the Railjack components. You probably also get a bunch of avionics as well, so that's going to be really important. We'll talk about that later. And ultimately, this is to streamline your initial Railjack experience so that you can probably deal with Earth in a really easy way, and then basically everything else will pretty much sink in as you practice using your Railjack. Alright, so let's assume that you haven't actually been able to find anyone to join in Railjack. Okay, that's fine. You're basically going to start off with 2 APOCs, one on your pilot seat and then also another 2 on your gunner seat. It's actually the same weapon. And you're also going to end up with a simple Taiko Seeker. That's fine. Here we are in the first mission of Earth, and we're basically using the first APOC and the first Taiko Seeker that we ever get. So these weapons, especially in this form of Railjack, now that Railjack is even easier than ever, they're actually pretty powerful, as is. Just be sure to know how to aim. Now, you're not going to actually see this little aiming circle right at the start. That's actually a gunner intrinsic. So you're going to have to deal with that, okay? You're going to have to actually figure out how to aim with these weapons right from the get-go until you get that gunner intrinsic, which gives you that little circle that is essentially a lead and indicator. So ignoring that for a second, just imagine that you're only seeing the squares. That is going to be your experience. So my personal recommendation is to basically use your APOC against small fighter ships. So for example, these cutters right here, they're pretty easy to kill with the APOC like so. But I'm not entirely sure if you're going to even come across a flak or an outrider. They are particularly tanky ships, especially the outrider, because the outrider actually comes with some shield generators. It looks like this mission is way too easy in the sense that it's way too early in Railjack to come across those kinds of fighters, so you're just going to be dealing with cutters. That's absolutely fine. Essentially, when it comes to using something like the Taiko Seeker, you probably want to actually get a particular gunner intrinsic, which I believe is the level 1 gunner intrinsic, don't quote me on that, which allows you to get that lead indicator as well as the ability to actually lock on to targets. The locking on to targets function works like this. So you see how there are these little diamonds that appear on the around the square, rather around the sort of diagonal square. So you see how they're showing up. As soon as those little triangles are, well, they're not really diamonds, are they? As soon as those little triangles are sort of locked on per se onto the corner of that square, you can fire your Taiko Seeker, and that Taiko Seeker actually becomes a missile. Should you fire too early, like I am about to right now, it actually just fires in a straight line, which is no good. So we have a flak right there. Oh wow, the flak is actually pretty easy to kill as well with an APOC. But in later missions, I would probably recommend that you just use a Taiko Seeker to destroy flaks. They are probably the tankiest in terms of numbers fighter, as opposed to the Outriders, which are these shield generator based fighters. They are really, really difficult to kill if you're going to use something like an APOC. They're even harder to kill even with the weapons that I normally use, and that's coming from me. So I would probably recommend sticking to the good old fashioned Taiko Seeker, which you get to use by using the middle mouse button. Boom, like so. Fantastic. So the overall objective of this particular mission is just a straight up extermination mission. So what we're going to do is we're just going to blow up all of these fighter ships like so. Is that a cutter? Yes, it is. Fantastic. Don't forget to use your sprint, but you won't be able to do that until you actually hit rank 1 pilot. That's why getting those intrinsics early by the use of joining other people's Railjacks is something that I highly recommend. There's so many basic things that you won't really have access to until you get at least some of those intrinsics. You should be able to get at least rank 1 of everything, which is probably really, really useful by the time you get at least one of these missions complete, because these fighters, they do actually give quite a nice but not a particularly chunky amount of affinity, which is obviously then converted to intrinsics. Now, we have these things called cruise ships. These cruise ships, they will do a lot of damage. Well, maybe not these ones, because this is of course the first Railjack mission, so they're probably designed not to do a whole lot of damage. But I'm going to attempt to avoid their damage by flying away. Cruise ships have, at least in the Vale, and this is probably the same for all cruise ships, they have a 3-kilometer distance before they pretty much stop trying to attack you. Notice how we are 4 kilometers away from these cruise ships and they're trying to chase us, and as a direct result of them being 4 kilometers away, they're not attacking us. So I would highly recommend, if you're going to engage cruise ships, to try and stay at least 3 kilometers away. That appears to be the magic number. Now, in order to engage a cruise ship at your level, which is super duper low level because you are just getting into Railjack, that's absolutely fine, you're going to want to approach these Railjacks in your Arcwing. Or rather, approach these cruise ships in your Arcwing. Now notice that I am trying to approach them in a sideways fashion, because they're going to fire at me, and these missiles, even at low level, they do quite a decent amount of damage to you, so you kind of want to not do that. You basically approach the back, and then you press X to enter. Now, here's the fun thing. If you're using something like a bow, such as my Paris Prime, I can actually shoot the engine from here. or rather the reactor from here, and then just duck right out. Great, that's why I prefer bringing a bow to basically everything. But alternatively, if you don't have a bow, then this is what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to have to enter the cruise ship like so. And let's say we're using the Athidai instead. The Athidai, pretty sure if that door is closed, it's not going to have enough punch through to actually get in there. In fact, my Athidai has no punch through point blank. That's fine. Just get up nice and close. This is the reactor. This big ass tall thing in the middle of the cruise ship, that's what you're going to blow up, okay? Alternatively, you could actually go to the pilot seat and actually steal the cruise ship. But for the time being in early missions, that's not particularly important. Okay? Speaking of breaches, which we talked about earlier, this is probably a great time to really demonstrate how a breach works. So I'm just going to jump out like so, which I don't really recommend if you actually have level 4 tactical intrinsics, but we'll talk about that later. We're going to fly back to our cruise ship, and oh, okay, never mind. The breach fixes itself if you actually finish off the mission. But essentially what would happen is, let's say that the breach was right here, we basically crack out the Omni door and we do that, and that'll basically fix up the breach. Fantastic. Awesome. After a few missions, what you're going to come up against are going to be objectives. So objectives involve going into a specific installation within that space and then doing some objective in there, such as hacking a particular console, and then having to go outside of the objective in order to shoot something. This is why you want to bring an ally, because this is actually meant to be designed to be done by a team, i.e. you have someone on the inside and then you have someone with a Railjack or maybe an Arcwing on the outside doing the outside part. So if you're going to go for a mission that has an objective, I definitely recommend getting at least one more player to join you. That is definitely a good idea. Awesome. Alrighty. Huzzah! Now you are a Railjack captain. Congratulations! You're now on your way to getting through all of the Railjack star chart in order to get the bits and bobs that will make your Railjack really, really good. Now, let's switch gears and assume for a second that you were actually someone who managed to find people to play Railjack with while you were waiting for your Railjack to get built. Great! Awesome! So, first thing you want to do is you want to have a look at what you actually got from all of those adventures. So, here we are in the dry dock. So the way to have a look at what you have is to basically come to this particular panel right here to configure your Railjack. So we have an entire list of components, an entire list of armaments, i.e. weapons, an entire list of your avionics, as well as your payloads, which is basically just something that you can use ad nauseum, as well as your intrinsics list. So let's start from the top. With your components, I'm going to keep this really, really simple. In terms of the reactor, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get a Vida reactor of some sort if you're joining a particular captain who is going through missions in the Vale. So if you get a Vida reactor of the Mark III kind, that is the first thing that you should definitely build. I would highly prioritize reactors whenever possible. So basically pick whichever reactor has the highest avionics capacity, build that. Boom, done. Awesome. Now, the next thing that I would actually prioritize is maybe a gun, specifically the gun that you would use for your pilot seat. You can switch your pilot seat and your gunner seat guns whenever you'd like, so that's perfectly fine. But essentially, the one I would probably choose is a Carcinox of some kind. Basically, whichever high tier Carcinox you have, pick the highest tier you have, build that. Now, if you happen to have a couple of Carcinoxes of the same tier, i.e. let's say Mark III, then I think for newer players I would recommend the Levan Carcinox over what I normally use, which is the Zetki Carcinox. The reason why I prefer that is because the Zetki Carcinox actually burns up faster, so it does more damage but it does burn up faster, which means you have to be better at using it. So if you're prone to missing because you're still not that familiar with how Railjack works in terms of aiming at the enemy fighters, probably want to stick to a Levan Carcinox that does have a lot more bullets before it just locks up and overheats. Fantastic. Alrighty, so the next thing I would actually look at is your engines. So in terms of your engines, basically again, the highest tier engines that you can build, I would recommend building that. If you do actually find a Vida engines of a Mark III kind or a Levan engines of a Mark III kind or whichever high tier you have, probably want to focus on the Vida engines instead of the Levan engines for this particular moment in time. That one is probably the easiest to deal with. The way it works right now is that the Vida engines seem to perform better over a long distance, whereas you're going to end up with more boost, i.e. you're going to end up with a higher boost speed while you're actually boosting if you're using Levan engines. So I don't know, I don't really see much of a use to use the Levant engines with their higher boost speed as opposed to the Vita engines which have a higher speed in general. So I'd probably say that this also pretty much flows with Vita engines of the Mark II kind or the Mark I kind. Basically, whichever highest tier Vita engines would probably be the way to go. The next thing is the second gun, which of course is your gunner's gun. So, in terms of the gunner's gun, an APOC is good, Levant's good. Depends on who your ally is, really. I have allies who think that they prefer a Photor, which, I don't know, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And there are also allies that I've come across who would rather I use a Pulsar, which I don't like using Pulsars in the slightest. But that's really just pick a gun and just slap it on, and if they like it, they like it. If they don't like it, they're gonna have to deal with it. Unfortunately, you can't really cater it to everyone, so just pick a gun that you like. I would probably recommend against Cryophans. That's the only gun in Railjack that I would probably recommend against. They're slow. Sure, they do a lot of damage, but that doesn't actually mean a whole lot in the long run. And did I mention that they're slow? That's the main problem. So probably would not recommend though that particular gun. Great. And finally, we have the shield. So the shield is probably the last thing that I will worry about because right now, in the current state of Railjack, the best shield is just having some competent piloting. So, I don't know, you don't really need the shield. I was running around with a Sigma shield array, i.e. the very, very basic shield array just then. No real issue, so long as I'm not just being a sitting duck. The only time that I did come across a problem was when my ship really was a sitting duck and those cruise ships were actually close enough to actually blow it out of space. But outside of that, if you do find yourself with enough resources to actually build a shield, probably would recommend building a Z-key shield of some kind. The highest tier you have is probably the way to go. That being said though, for newer players, it does make sense to go for say a Levant shield or a Vita shield of some kind. I think the Levant shield might have more shield capacity if that's something you want to deal with. The main reason why I prefer Z-key shields really is just for that really, really quick shield regeneration. With that -4 second shield regeneration delay on my Z-key shield Mark III, I can't really speak right now, that kind of makes it better for me to get that shield cap back so that I can get a good old-fashioned shield gating happening. That's right, Railjack had shield gating before actual WarFrames had shield gating. That's pretty much it. So, now that you've figured all of that out, let's have a look at the next thing that you want to have a look at. There's going to be a lot of things that you need to sort through if you actually did grab a bunch of things by joining other Railjacks. So, there's a good to fair chance that your clan has actually researched a bunch of things. So, you can actually look at it through this particular tab right here. If, on the off chance you actually didn't get any of the branded Carcinoxes, Apocs, Cryophans, Pulsars, Photons, etc., then you probably want to stick to using an unbranded, i.e. basic mode, Carcinox, Apoc, etc., etc. To that end, I would probably say just try to build the highest tier Carcinox that you can, and then just slap it on your ship. You actually don't need to go through any kind of hurdle in order to slap whatever weapon on your ship. There's no leveling up process in terms of which weapon you can use. That's why, if you have the resources to make a Carcinox Mark III, boom! Make yourself a Carcinox Mark III. It's that simple. The other thing that I would definitely keep an eye on is the Tycho Seekers. Now, the Tycho Seekers are really, really strong, and I find that they are pretty much a staple machine-killing weapon in terms of destroying things like Outriders and Flaks. To that end, I will probably keep an eye on how many resources you have and which Tycho Seeker you can build at that particular moment in time. One thing to note when it comes to building anything that I was talking about is the moment you come across something that is either stronger or something that is of a higher tier, you can scrap the thing that you have and you basically get 80% of the resources back anyway. So there is a huge refund policy when you're building stuff. So I wouldn't really worry too much about, oh no, here's a thing that I'm building, but it could become completely useless. That's fine, you're just going to get your resources back. Great. Awesome. Now let's have a look at our avionics grid. So the avionics grid is probably the most subjective part of building a Railjack, but here is my avionics grid, and it pretty much remains the same ever since Railjack Revisited. So essentially, what would I prioritize if I were a new player? Well, first thing first, I would try to get out 3 battle avionics, or at least 2. The defensive avionics are kinda here and there, especially for new players, but the offensive avionics, and more importantly, the super avionics, they're really easy to use for the most part. Particle Ram and Seeker Volley are probably the easiest to figure out. Particle Ram, of course, turning your Railjack into a Railjack with essentially a giant axe, whereas the Seeker Volley is basically a press one button and missiles fly out and they destroy everything. It's really, really strong. So definitely want to prioritize these three first, or at least those two in particular. Next avionics that I would actually prioritize are at least one, if not two, tactical avionics. Things like Void Cloak and Battleforge are super duper useful. If you happen to find yourself getting rammed a lot, you can later consider using something like Intruder Stasis. There are some other really, really good tactical avionics as well. So, for example, we can have a look at something like Flowburn, which is probably the most expensive tactical avionic. It's good for speed, but, you know, it is pretty expensive. Outside of that, you also have Battle Stations and Death Blossoms. So these two are really good if you happen to be super duper into turret gameplay. So if you're really good at shooting enemies and you just want to do even more damage and also have the ability to just continue firing like so, then yeah, these two, really, really good for that. Basically, just go through the tactical avionics playlist that I have made. I pretty much cover almost every single battle and tactical avionic in the special avionics playlist. That will give you a rundown of how each battle avionic as well as each tactical avionic, bar about 3 possibly, work. So there we go. The next intrinsics that I would actually prioritize are speed-based intrinsics. So there's one called Cruising Speed. That one's, I think, particularly difficult to get, although I did manage to get it in an early mission within a matter of seconds, so maybe it's not that hard to get. So essentially you want to get Ion Burn and Conic Nozzle. These actually allow your cruise ship... Oh crap. These allow you to get your Railjack to be really, really fast. I live and breathe speed all the damn time, so obviously I have a huge bias to speed on my Railjack. Not the best way to explain that, but there are some people who would swear up and down that speed is not particularly important. I believe they are wrong. I would rather go for a speedy Railjack than a tanky Railjack any day of the week. Again, your Railjack is tanky if your pilot is competent. That's my motto. So a fast Railjack is a safe Railjack in my opinion. Next thing you probably want to look at getting is a turret intrinsic, specifically the one called Hyperstrike. This one is probably considered a staple intrinsic in the sense that it does straight up give you extra turret damage. That's often really, really good, although there are some people who make a good argument to not use Hyperstrike at all because they're way more interested in using abilities instead. That makes sense to me as well, so you can really think about using it. It is a bit expensive on the avionics side, but if you can make it work, I would definitely make it a priority as well. Other than that, the other thing that would probably be prioritized depends on who you ask, but survival intrinsics. So what are we talking about? We are talking about intrinsics such as Bulkhead, which increases your hull by 506%. That, of course, will give your Railjack a whopping 6,060 health, going up from 1,000 health. Great. Together with Bulkhead, you would probably also want to use something called Hull Weep, which will increase your max armor by 253%. That will bring your armor from 1,000 to 3,530. So that could make your Railjack a lot tankier, provided you can fit it within that avionics grid. That's kind of why you want to focus on getting a reactor, because the better reactor you have, the more things you can put on your avionics grid. Outside of that, there are some other intrinsics that you can use, like artillery, cheap shot, and all that stuff. They're much more utility based, and that's entirely up to you. I probably hold off on these kinds of random utility based intrinsics until you get a better feel for the game. That way you have a better idea of what you're looking for, and then you can basically build your avionics grid to fit that need. Finally, you may want to have a look at the intrinsics that you have gotten. So here is the intrinsics list. I obviously have maxed out all of my intrinsics, so that's the deal. But as a new player, you may see on the top right hand corner that you have a bunch of intrinsics available. That allows you to actually level up your intrinsics. So we have 4 entire lists to level up, and each one will take twice as many resources as the level before it in order to rank up. So for example, rank 1 requires 1, rank 2 requires 2, rank 3 requires 4, etc, etc. Now, there are some that I would definitely recommend. The first one is tactical level 4. It's called Recall Warp. Omni Gear can be used to warp aboard the ship from anywhere. This is super duper useful, especially if you're joining other people's Railjacks, because there's a good to fair chance that they're going to send you to do an objective, or they're going to send you to go and board a cruise ship. When you are outside of your Railjack, and if the Railjack happens to be really, really far away, you can then, on that particular spot, activate your Omni Gear, and that will allow you to just warp straight back to your Railjack. No walking around, no trying to find an exit, you just warp straight back in. It's like you're the Protoss, so that's really, really powerful. The next intrinsic that I would definitely recommend getting is Engineering Level 2. So, Engineering Level 2 is Flux Forge. Forge flux energy in real time to power the vessel battle avionics. What the hell does that mean? Let's have a look. Let's say you're actually at the pilot area. So the way to get to the forge is to actually walk all the way to the back of the ship. It's actually on the lower level, so you're going to have to come down here as well. And we're basically running and 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 running. And here we are in the cargo hold, i.e. the forge. So basically the way this works is you can press X here and it will give you a menu to choose from for things that you want to build as the engineer. I would definitely recommend getting that forge flux working so that you can actually forge some flux in order to power those battle avionics that you may or may not have. If you don't have any battle avionics, then you could probably ignore Engineering Level 2 for the time being, but outside of that I think is really, really important. And finally, you may want to get Gunnery Level 5, which is called Artillery Command. Control the forward-mounted artillery cannon. So basically, you're going to need this if you want to do the Nightwave Challenge, which involves destroying a cruise ship with the forward artillery. You can't really use the forward artillery unless you have that. But where is the forward artillery located? Let's have a look. Starting from the pilot seat area, it's actually just right behind. Here it is. So basically you walk up here, you press X, you'll actually then be sitting in the forward artillery chair in order to charge up the great big beam cannon that can destroy cruise ships. So that's really, really good. One thing to know when using your Railjack is if you actually get Tactical Level 1, which is definitely something you're going to get if you're going to get Tactical Level 4, you actually have access to something called the Tactical Menus. So, on my particular keyboard, it's hotkey to L, but that might be hotkey to something else. This is the Tactical Menu, right? With the Tactical Map. And this actually allows you to jump to different areas of your Railjack. So here we've jumped straight to the forge, here we've jumped straight to a side gun, here I've jumped straight to the back, here I've jumped straight to the pilot seat. This is super duper useful because it allows you to basically save a lot of time by warping to different parts of the Railjack. So definitely recommend using that a whole lot because it is really, really strong. Ultimately, your initial experience of Railjack is going to be very, very similar to if you actually didn't find anyone to join. It's just that it's going to be a lot easier because you're obviously using some parts that you already grabbed from other missions. For example, we have our ship currently in cloak mode, which is definitely something you're not going to have if you didn't actually join anyone. Now, if we jump into our ship, one of the main things that you will find if you're using a fully kitted out or at least partially kitted out ship against enemies on Earth space, even the turret will kill them in basically one shot. Like, this is pretty easy, and that would basically mean that your initial experience is going to be more relying on you practicing how to actually use your Railjack for the most part, as opposed to actually trying to deal with damage and all of that stuff. It's really more about how to aim with your turrets, for example, how to actually boost around with your Railjack, how to get used to your Railjack, all that good stuff. Another way also to wipe out the entire map of enemies is to basically use your forward, or rather your palm Seeker Volley, like so. The Seeker Volley is really, really strong, especially a fully maxed out Seeker Volley like so. Keep in mind that if you actually destroy a cruise ship, quote unquote, by taking out its entire health, that actually doesn't do anything. You actually need to blow it up with the forward artillery, or you actually need to board it. I actually have the particle ram activated at the moment, so I'm just going to throw it out. And one way to also basically easy mode these enemies is to activate your particle ram and just fly into them. A maxed out particle ram will definitely take out all of these enemies, no problem. Hell, this is Earth space. Even a not so maxed out particle ram will probably take them all out in one fell swoop because this is super duper easy. Now, like I said, in order to actually kill a cruise ship, you're going to need to use the forward artillery. So we can actually demonstrate that right now. So, once again, we're going to find ourselves around 3 kilometers away from our enemy cruise ships like so. And that's where the real practice comes in. If you can actually hit a cruise ship from at least 3 kilometers away, I think that is going to be a very, very valuable skill. Right now, this cruise ship is 4 kilometers away. Boom, done. This cruise ship is some 8 kilometers away. Is it going to be going behind a rock? Doesn't look like it, so I'm going to hit it like so. Notice that if you actually hit the engines of the cruise ship, you actually do a lot more damage. So that's definitely something that I would recommend practicing. Try to aim for the engines of the cruise ship with your forward artillery. That is definitely something that's going to be a very, very valuable skill later on in the future of your WarFrame endeavors, especially your Railjack endeavors. Aside from that, the only thing that won't really change is the idea that objectives should be done with a friend, so definitely bring a friend if you're going to do that. But outside of that, congratulations! You're now on your way to becoming a really, really powerful Railjack captain. And that's pretty much it. So let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me about this in those comments, or you can actually join me on stream when I'm playing Railjack, or even if I'm not playing Railjack, you can just ask me there. That's also perfectly fine. Ultimately, it boils down to the following. Try to join another Railjack as a crew member and start getting stuff. Getting stuff is super duper good, obviously. Try to use that stuff that you already got to streamline your experience at the start as you are clearing the star chart, and then practice. Practice using your battle avionics, practice your maneuvering, practice your aiming, and most importantly, practice using the forward artillery against cruise ships at long distances. This is very, very important, as this particular skill is going to be super duper useful later on. Being able to hit a cruise ship from more than 3 kilometers away, hell, being able to hit a cruise ship from 5, 10, 15 kilometers away, I think that is a really, really special skill to have, and that basically puts you a tier above other random people who tend to join my Railjack, so that is definitely appreciated. But outside of that, we're pretty much done. So, hope you guys enjoyed it. If you liked this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more WarFrame content, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.